Hello and welcome to this special broadcast on Zimbabwe. Now, as the elections draw closer, this African country is fast changing, or at least it appears to be desperately gunning for a change. On one hand, the ruling ZANU-PF has its goals cut out, bringing Zimbabwe back on track. And on the other hand, the opposition is questioning the leadership and calling for an overhaul. And not far behind are the protesters who back in 2016 took to the streets on issues more than just once. Freedom of expression, media freedom, bond notes, several other issues kept protesters on the streets and the administration on tenterhooks. Now, in light of these protests, whether a success or a failure, we leave that to the people and to the country of Zimbabwe to decide. Movement for Democratic Change, T, under the leadership of former Prime Minister in the Mugabe regime, Tsvangirai, has chosen to look beyond the obvious. The party is raising a pertinent question, and that is about tired nationalism. The biggest opposition party in Zimbabwe, MDCT, questions why are nationalist movements and liberation movements failing to connect to the new generation? What has gone wrong? Why are post-liberation movements now in vogue in Zimbabwe and in the region at large? With this as the starting point, especially the failure of liberation movements to meet the key demands of modern Twitter generation that wants jobs, they want basic freedoms, I have the pleasure of welcoming the leader of MDCT, Mr. Tsvangirai. You're at home. Welcome to joining the conversation. Our Twitter handle is at ANN7TV. Phone line is at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to give us a call. Tell us what you think of the topic that we'll be discussing tonight. Mr. Tsvangirai, welcome to ANN7's Africa Tonight.
Thank you for inviting me to this debate.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, sir. The issue at hand today is tired nationalism. Why are the liberation movements failing to connect, particularly with the youth? Like we saw in Zimbabwe in 2016, we saw the youth on the streets protesting, saying, we want our jobs, we want financial liberation. What do you think is happening? And then we see post-national movements like MDC, like yourselves, civic society resonating more with the youth. Yeah. What do you think is happening?
Well, first and foremost, we really have to applaud the efforts that our founding liberation movements have done to liberate us from colonialism. But that's insufficient. Freedom on one hand is not the same as development on the other. And I think there has been a serious disconnect between the liberation generation and the new generation, because the liberation generation has not lived up to the expectations of those that are educated, young, and vibrant. And what you see with this disconnect is that they have been overtaken by the demands of the new generation. Why? Because there is a sense by some of the nationalist movements that once the liberation is achieved, therefore that's the end, and with all, it must be a sense, there is a sense of entitlement. The question of governance has not been central, other than the retention of power. And I think that is a very serious problem, because when people make demands, we want jobs, we want freedom, we want to find our potential.
Right.
The response from the state has been, why should you complain? We liberated you. And I think that's a very serious problem. And this blame game of thinking that because we fought for the liberation, everything that follows must be blamed on the former colonial masters. Surely, you can't say 50, 60 years after independence, you still blame the colonialists for your own failures. And I think that failure to admit that we have also a very serious problem of governance that we need to deal with.
The renewal of structures, but particularly in liberation movements, seems to be a huge problem, tantamount to treason, some would say. Do you think perhaps it stems from how these liberation movements were formed back when they really didn't use democratic processes when they came up with their movements, and there wasn't really a political competition at that point? Do you think they have brought that to the age of millennials that we see now?
Yes, I think, take for instance ZANU-PF. And the liberation movement, PF, the combination of ZANLA and ZIPRA. Do you really believe that the fight for liberation was democratic? It was not. It was an armed, protracted liberation movement. There was no democracy to tell about. If the story be properly told, they had to do certain things in order to advance the interests of the struggle. But in the process, also instituted a lot of crimes, violence, and cultures that are totally undemocratic. So they translated the liberation culture into independence, and they have never transformed into a democratic movement. You see, for instance, when the MDC came into place, the first accusation was that why are you forming an alternative political formation? You must be sent by somebody. Right. And in this case, you must be puppets of the whites or puppets of the West.
Yes, and that's another topic that, we'll discuss later.
Yeah, so the structures were never democratic. And there was no effort to try to democratize ZANU-PF in government. They perpetuated the same culture of centralism, corruption, and even one-man rule.
Right. And speaking of renewal of structures, Mr. Tsvangirai, you yourself have been the leader of MDCT since 1999. It's been 17 years now. Do you think perhaps you are mirroring the image of what will you call a dictator, a person who does not want to get into power? Why haven't you given up power by now yourself? Why haven't you given...
What is giving up power? In this case, the president of the Movement for Democratic Change is elected by a constituency across the country. We are in a struggle, and in a struggle, sometimes it's very difficult to change horses in the middle of the struggle. It's not that we are not thinking about it. We are already putting in place the mechanism so that the party should not be identified with an individual. We want to move.
But this has been the case for 17 years now, Mr. Tsvangirai.
It has been the case, not because of the choice of the leader, but because of the nature of the struggle and the association with which people have confidence in the leader.
There has been speculation that you are perhaps grooming or considering the Vice President Nelson Chamisa to take over from you.
That's far from true. I want to say that that is undemocratic. When we work out the question of who can take over moving the country, the party forward, it will be the people of Zimbabwe, the people of the MDC, who democratically elect their leader in the structures of the party.
All right, let's welcome our viewers back at home. We have a few callers on the line. Robert from Randfontein, thank you for joining us. What is your comment or question?
My comment is to Mr. President Morgan Tsvangirai. They must push for the election reforms very much. We kindly and we support them on that one, because we have been denied so long the right to vote outside the country. So if they push that, this will bring the resounding victory, which in any case Mugabe will not do anything about it. It will be a straight victory.
Will you be going home to vote in 2018?
I'm not sure. That's why I say they must push the
electoral reform so we can have a diaspora vote. Point noted. Thank you, Robert from Randfontein there. We have Sam from Cape Town. Sam, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Your comment or question?
Good night, ma'am. You're speaking to Sam. Listen, I just want to greet the viewers and Mr. Tsvangirai. Look here, what I see the failure in Africa, there's one problem that we have really ignored. The problem, it is not about what is happening to Zimbabwe. This thing will happen into South Africa the same. The failure is we adopt a system that makes us uncomfortable, and that system is very dangerous. We are in the hands of those monopolies. What is happening right now in Africa, it is not about. The big problem it is when we take power, we forget that where we come from. Right. And this is what is happening. But the thing, let me tell you that Africa is in a problem. We have to solve our own problems. But if we have these objections from the outside, Africa will suffer, and this is what is happening, and South Africa is next.
Sam, I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you off there. We have more callers on the phone line. Thank you for making your point. African solutions for African problems, basically, that's what Sam from Cape Town is saying. Stephen from Douglasdale, thank you for joining us. What is your comment? Let's keep it very short and sweet.
Thank you, Audrey. Just a quick one. specifically Mr. Tsvangirai, in the case of Zimbabwe, how are the challenges of tired nationalism manifesting themselves? And is there any hope for nationalist movements to redeem themselves? And in what sense will the MDC be different from these tired nationalist political parties?
Right, Stephen, thank you for your question. I'll pose it to Mr. Tsvangirai. Coming back into studio, Mr. Tsvangirai, our first caller spoke of election reform.
Yeah.
Before you answer that, I just want to touch on this one issue. You just came back from Ghana, the inauguration of the new president of that country over the weekend. On what capacity were you invited? Were you representing the people of Zimbabwe, or was it this is your own personal capacity? Because we do know that the Mugabe government was not invited at all.
I'm aware that the government was, through the diplomatic channels, invited like any other African government. So if they didn't attend, that's neither here or there. I was invited as leader of the opposition, not in that capacity necessarily, but they are our friends.
Right.
They are pathfinders.
What did you learn from the election in terms of electoral reforms, like what our caller was talking about?
Yes.
What can we apply in our own in a Zimbabwe system
There's
to
a
make
lot
sure
that
that
needs
we
to
can
be,
improve it?
the whole election machinery has to be changed so that the people's vote is not subverted. In our case, there is a lot. We don't have media space for the opposition. Violence is prevalent. When people, just recently, Brigadier Mtambara was almost killed just because he's opposition. Then you have the question of the mechanism, the technical capacity of Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. And you also have judiciary playing a role to try to suppress the will of the people. I mean, if I still have my election contest in 2002 still on the bench and has not been dealt with. How many years after? It's almost 10 years after. So you do have some complicity that we are opposed to. So there are a number of issues. We have produced a document. We have presented that document to Zimbabwe Electoral Commission. It has basic standards. First of all, the fact that we are part of SADC, there are SADC rules, and we are part of the AU, we have AU rules, and every benchmark is being violated when it comes to the Zimbabwe election.
You also met with a number of African heads of states, yeah. I understand, when you're in Ghana. Would you care to share what exactly you were discussing?
Well, I mean, the whole question is about the forthcoming election in Zimbabwe. And to draw their attention that we can't have another disputed election again. With President Obasanjo, I said you were the chief observer mission for the AU. But you know what happened? The last night before we went to the election, I went with President Obasanjo and President Mugabe, and I pointed out one constituency which had 200 names. Same birth, same name, on a voters' roll. And the voters' roll had not been available to the opposition. So those are some of the technical issues, apart from the security issues, where the security establishment gets itself involved. There are 11 officers now employed by ZEC Secretariat. And that you can't have.
Mr. Tsvangirai, you're now engaging African heads of states. I don't think this is something that you used to do in the past. You have been fighting this image that you're a puppet of the West for quite a while now. Do you think you've done enough to erase that image? Or
no, this is not the first time.
Because people have this perception that perhaps African leaders as well, to say if you were to be given Zimbabwe to rule, it will be a threat to the whole region because you would perhaps literally give it to the West.
That is a presumption that has been taken by ZANU-PF propaganda when the MDC was formed. If the MDC was a puppet, how could it have withstood 17 years of existence? It is a people's project. The fact that we are an alternative post-liberation formation does not in itself say that we are not Africans. But we are saying the issue and the conditions that exist in our own country demands an alternative political formation. It doesn't matter what stereotype you try to create. And besides, I've been very much in good books, some of the African heads of state, in Kenya, in Botswana, here in South Africa. I've engaged everyone. And without that engagement, there would not have been an inclusive government.
Right. We have another caller on the phone line, Owen from Eastern Cape. Owen, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Your question or comment?
Yeah, it's a question. Hello, how are you?
Very well, thanks. Please go ahead.
I do have a question to Tsvangirai. It's like, I don't understand when he's talking about democracy. Yet he himself, I understand that if you say from the breakaway other MDC parties, they are all just because they want a change of a man on the helm of the party. That means they want him to resign and appoint another one to take over. That's because, for me, basically, I do believe there's no one who can rewrite the examination twice and failing. If you can fail twice for examination, that means we fail. So Tsvangirai must accept that he failed to lead the party. Someone must take over. I think that's all.
Oh, and thank you for your call. Mr. Tsvangirai, would you care to respond to that?
I don't have any response. What is democracy? Democracy is the will of the people. The will of the people in the MDC is that they want their president to continue. And when it comes to elections, where these elections conducted in a free and fair, where they were condemned by the
legitimacy of the elections.
Yeah, the legitimacy of the elections. If they were free and fair elections, I'll be the first one to acknowledge and congratulate the winner. But in this case, we won the 2008 election. Did Mugabe accept that we had won the election? No. So when you get people saying, you have failed, where have I failed? The question is that let's get the proper, fair, credible elections conducted so that the people themselves are satisfied that this is the legitimate government we have elected.
Stephen from Douglasdale spoke of tribe nationalism.
Yeah.
Would you like to touch on that?
Well, it's exhausted insofar as that you can't continue to peddle nationalist positions that won us the freedom, because it doesn't connect with the new demands that are being made by the young generation. And that's where the disconnect comes. And I'm saying tired because if you look at Zimbabwe, we have a 94-year-old man going to contest. Now, the country is on its knees, the economy, everything is on its knees. Now, what more policy proposals or alternative policy proposals that they are able to do now, what they have not done over the last 36 years? That's why they are tired. They can't have coherent policy position. They can't have a solution to the unemployment problem. They can't even have a solution. In fact, what we see is a degeneration of the economic factors. That
and Owen says, what are you going to do different that you have failed to do in the past 17 years?
Well, we are in opposition. We are saying to the people of Zimbabwe, we have a plan to resuscitate the economy. In fact, when we went into the JNU, we were the ones who reversed the decline. And everyone knows, 85% of Zimbabweans know what the MDC has done to reverse the decline in 2009 to 2014.
I'll ask you to hold on to that thought. We have Takawira from Vidbank. Takawira, very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Your question or comment?
It's both. It's a comment. Good evening. How are you?
Yes, very well, please. Go ahead.
Can you hear me clearly?
Loud and clear, Takawira. Go ahead.
Okay. I want to make 2 points on Mr. Tsvangirai. The first issue that is trying to circle around the issue of leadership in the MDC is very important, because when you consider, like he's saying, a 94-year-old man rerunning elections, and democratically maybe ZANU-PF would say he is wanted by ZANU-PF members. But when you go to MDC, there is need for leadership renewal. Mr. Tsvangirai can actually give power the same way O.R. Tambo did and Walter Sisulu's in the ANC. If they follow the plan of ANC, succession plan of ANC, it's very good. It can actually give confidence to the people.
Thank you for your call. I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you off there. The issue of succession again, Mr. Tsvangirai.
Well, if that were the case, would Mandela have stayed in prison for 27 years, only to come and lead the country for 5 years? Would Oliver Tambo given up during the struggle? The struggle has got.
Are you saying there's no one else who's fit enough to take over?
No, not in our case. That's why we have got a plan. That's why we have got the constitution, which allows for everyone to. It's not about giving up. It's about achieving the goal.
It's about renewing structures.
Yes, it's a renewing structures, renewing everything. But in this case, I'm just posing a question. Would it have been fair for Oliver Tambo to live in the midst of a struggle to give up? Would it have been fair for Mandela to give up, just to give up to the others? Not because giving up, but allowing the struggle to continue having its own momentum.
And perhaps you can explain that analogy after we take this call. This caller, viewers from across the continent are engaging with us right now. We have a caller all the way from Zimbabwe, Bulawayo Musa. Very good evening to you. Thank you for joining us. Your question or comment?
Very good evening, and thank you very much for taking my call.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I've got 3 questions, and they are around the nationalistic movement in Africa, which is the topic that you're discussing now. The first question really that I have is, what has gone wrong with nationalist political movements in the region? Okay. My second question is, what are the major frailties of liberation movement in the region and in Africa? And the third question is nationalism per se a bad thing, considering that most African countries are led by nationalistic movements? Thank you.
Right, Musa, thank you so much for your call there. Musa from Bulawayo,
Well,
again,
I think it's a relevant question. The question is not to blame nationalists or to blame nationalism.
Yes.
The question is, what do you do? What is your plan after achieving the liberation that you have been fighting for? That is the main question. And what has been your record for the past 50 or 60 years in building an economy, in building hope for the people in terms of the young generation, in terms of expanding inter-regional trade and all those things.
Right, so your record should speak for you. We have Mark from Cape Town.
Yeah.
Apologies, Mr. Tsvangirai. Mark from Cape Town, thank you for joining us. Very quickly, please, your question or comment.
Yes, I would just like to point out that I'm very interested to see Morgan on TV again. Welcome.
Thank you.
And I feel that the solidarity in our African people and white people is broken. And the longer we perpetuate these divisions in both the Matabele and the Mashona and the white Zimbabweans, we will never have peace. And South Africa is suffering the same way. We are all brothers. We are all coming from the same land, from the same place. We never felt racism until we came to South Africa as a Matabele, me personally, speaking from a Matabele. I never felt racism until I came to South Africa. So it's very painful that our solidarity and our feelings for each other as Zimbabweans is being destroyed by politics.
Mark, yes, Mark, I think you've made your point. We certainly appreciate it. Thank you for calling all the way from Cape Town. Mark brings a very sensitive topic of divisions. We spoke of tribal divisions in Zimbabwe. Now he speaks of race as well.
Yeah. No, I think the challenge that we face as a country is how do we build a democratic society with a multi-ethnic and multicultural society? Why should any part of the country feel they are second rate? So that is the challenge. Unfortunately, the nationalists have built a culture which says that if I'm president of the MDC, I must get a vice president from Matabele in order to balance this.
And it appears it's a regional problem. We have seen this happening to a lot of African countries.
Ethnic balancing, we should just move away from it and create what I would call meritocracy for people to be judged on themselves. It's something that is now entrenched, and we have to move away from that.
Right. And speaking of unity, Zimbabwe People First and MDCT are viewed as the leaders of the coalition partnership, should it materialize. However, it is reported that MDCT is not quite committed to this marriage.
Would you like to
comment on that?
How do you judge that?
Well, we have the Bikita West by-elections that are coming through. I understand you haven't committed yourself as MDCT to say you will be part of that rally. We saw what happened as well with Themba Mliswa in Norton. He says last minute you didn't give him the support that you had promised at the MDCT.
Well, let me start with Themba. I don't want to comment about Themba because he knows what happened.
Okay, let's speak of the coalition
let's
with MDCT and the Zimbabwe PF and your commitment to that.
The MDC is very committed. In fact, you are far, far behind to say that the MDC is not committed because of a by-election. A by-election is a by-election. It has nothing to do with the fundamental principles of alliance building.
Is it not a litmus test, though,
it is
for
not.
What is to come
It is
ahead?
not, because it has never been part of the agenda. The question of going and contesting in by-elections has never been part of the agenda. The agenda is that how do we build an alliance pre-election and a coalition post-election. Right. And secondly, how do we agree on the various policies that will confront us as an alliance? And thirdly, how do you build an executive post-election into an effective coalition government? In other words, the executive structure. So I think it's presumptuous to say that the MDC is not committed. What litmus test is there?
So the MDCT is committed. Let's take two more callers. Nyasha from Mafikeng, thank you for calling. Very quickly, your comment or question.
Okay. Now, I would love to do my comment very fast. Right. What I would love to say is like, Mr. Tsvangirai, I do not blame you to be there leading the MDC for a very long time. Because for now, if you step down, it will look like MDC is getting weaker. And then, especially now that they know that they have a very good challenge from Mr. Tsvangirai, I think that will be very good for MDC. But to be truly honest, before the 2018 elections, Mr. Tsvangirai, you have to fight for the reformations of the electoral reforms, because those electoral reforms are needed so that we can change. Especially right now, look, all those people who are outside Zimbabwe cannot vote. But that's where the population of Zimbabwe is.
Absolutely, Nash. I'm sorry, I'll have to cut you off. They were running out of time. Electoral reforms is the point that you're making. Darlington, our very last caller, thank you for calling. Very quickly, your comment or question?
Okay, I would like to comment to Mr. President. There is quite a number of things that I've heard you put aside. There's the fact of us Zimbabweans flowing here to South Africa, running away from our very own country. The ZANU-PF as it stands, it has failed. I'm appealing, I'm asking you, Mr. President, on behalf of other Zimbabweans who are in foreign countries like me, please come together, all small opposition parties, and you, the MDCT that we know, come together, win the 2018 elections and sort your differences out. After you finish winning the elections, get rid of this President Mugabe. We don't want him. He has failed us as the generation. We are failing our kids because of him. Please just get my advice and help us. That's all I have to say.
Darlington from Polokwane, thank you for your call there and your comment to Mr. Tsvangirai.
Well,
one of the callers saying we understand that you haven't left your leadership.
We all see the strategic need for it. And come 2018 is crossing the Rubicon. If we don't succeed in having the change, we would have betrayed a lot of expectations of Zimbabweans. But it takes two to tango. It takes everyone to make a part, to play a part. The young generation has to play a part if they have to make a difference. Everyone must register. I know that we still have to battle with the issue of diaspora vote, and that vote is essential in adding to the synergies that we are all talking about. So is speaking to the converted. Right. We are very committed to ensure that we don't betray the national sentiment about coming together and forging a strong
some voters are saying perhaps they haven't seen as the coalition that you're hoping to make with other opposition parties. Have you come up with a game plan? They haven't really heard anything from your side with regards to that.
Well, just wait until the election, the coalition or the alliance is unveiled. We are busy looking at everything, and one of the critical things is that we have a plan. For the MDC, we do have a plan that we need to change the governance culture that ZANU-PF has set for the last 4 decades.
Right.
We need to institutional transformation. We need a transformation agenda that is going to change the way we do things. The policies we articulate must attract national and international confidence. That's what we are looking at. We have to restore the freedoms of Zimbabweans. No more disappearance of people. No more brutalizing by the police just because people are expressing themselves. These are things, these are rights that Zimbabweans must enjoy. We want to see an infrastructure that is as good as can play the critical role in which Zimbabwe positions itself as a transport hub. We need these things because that is where the focus should be.
And speaking of nationalist movements, people say, if we look at rural Zimbabwe, it appears that ZANU-PF seems to have quite a strong hold there. Are people still holding just to that nostalgic feeling of what?
No, it's not nostalgic. It's fear and cohesion. That characterizes the rural areas. I mean, I can tell you that in 2008 we broke that. But then it was restored by the re-election process, which took place in 2008. And I want to tell you, there are massive and massive people who were victimized during the 2008 runoff, just because they were being asked, why did you vote for the opposition? I mean, for the MDC, we're talking about Manicaland, Masvingo, Midlands, Matabeleland, all the urban areas.
But isn't that the disconnect that we're talking about? That if you look at the younger generation, they resonate more with the post-liberation movement organizations that we have seen. Then we see the Gogos in the rural areas who really still hold on to ZANU-PF. That is all they know. Well, how do you bridge that gap? The
challenge is, how do you close the gap between the expectations of the young ones and the old traditional way?
Yes, especially if you're getting into an election so soon.
We believe that there is a generational challenge, and therefore we have to send a message of hope, message of the future, message of possibilities for the young generation. For the old generation, all they want to know is that are their children and their children's children catered for their benefits.
And to our viewers, due to an overwhelming response that we're getting from you and the phone calls that are still lining up as I speak, we've decided to extend the show for another 10 or 15 minutes or so. So if you still want to get to your phones, go ahead and give us a call. The phone number is at the bottom of your screen. You can also tweet us. We'll be able to read out your tweets. All the way from Harare again in Zimbabwe. Simba, thank you for calling us. Your question or comment, please. Simba, can you hear me? Okay, we seem to have a technical glitch there. Simba, you can try and give us a call in a few minutes and we'll be happy to hear from you. Mr. Tsvangirai, we're speaking of bridging the generational gap.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think there are factors that we have. In fact, the biggest challenge we face in 2018 is a choice, not only political transition, but also a generational transition. Now, on the political transition, I think we can talk about reforming the system of elections and all that. But the fundamental issue, the young man, like my son would ask me, how are you going to protect my vote? Because we have voted before. And this is the answer that we have to give. That there are reforms that are taking place. We are protecting your vote. We make sure that you, the young generation, must not only define, but must defend and secure the future for yourselves. You have to play a part. And you play a part in defining the leadership you deserve. And that is how we are going to appeal to this young generation to say, it's not a hopeless case. Every country goes through phases.
Right.
And this is now your challenge.
The social movements that we have been seeing in Zimbabwe, particularly in 2016, mobilizing the youth, we have to credit them with some of the protests that we saw on the streets. Obviously, they are more concerned with human security, and then you have the ZANU-PF party that is more concerned with regime security. Yes. Again, how do we, those dynamics, how do we work around that?
Well, the thing is that we have to appreciate that the struggle has various forms. If the young men stand up and say, we want our freedom, we don't want people to be abused, and all the police are brutalizing.
Do you think they're legitimate? Do you think perhaps they pose some kind of threat to the opposition? Or are these people that you can work with?
No, these are people who will work with. Because as I said, the struggle has various forms and various formations. The unfortunate thing is that you have ZANU-PF which says that we cannot reform to get ourselves out of power.
Right.
We cannot implement the constitution because it allows for people to express themselves. All this brutalization that takes place is unconstitutional and illegal. How do you have a situation where a police officer says, I'm going to ban activities, any demonstration around this area, I'm not going to allow it? A police officer. It's not even a political decision. You see the abuse of the bureaucracy in favor of ZANU-PF that is taking place.
Right. Nick from Cape Town, thank you for calling us. Your question or comment?
Okay, thank you very much. My comment is the way I see the problem in Zimbabwe. I think we need to do it the way South Africa had its independence. What we need is to sort the fear of the unknown. That's the source of the problem. You know, I think for me, Mr. Tsvangirai and President Mugabe should come together, sit, have something first before the elections. I think fear of the unknown, that's the problem in Zimbabwe.
Right. Nick from Cape Town, thank you for your call. Julianne Krugersdorp, thank you for calling us. Your question or comment?
Good evening, how are you?
Very well, please go ahead.
Yes. My question to Mr. Tsvangirai is, what was the benefit of the government of national unity? Did it benefit in any way the party, I mean MDC? And the other question is with regards to what is the stalemate on the judgment for the 2002 elections. What's the position of the Zimbabwean government, and why is it taking long? And why don't you appeal to the SADC or the international community to intervene?
Right, Julian, thank you for those two questions. August from Randburg, thank you for calling us. Your question or comment?
Hello. I wanted to ask Mr. Tsvangirai two questions, really, and to pass a comment at the same time. My first question is in the process, in the event that the MDC wins and the 2008 kind of scenario plays out again where ZANU-PF sticks in, what measures have they put in place to make sure that they safeguard the vote of the people? That's the first question. The second question is, and in the event that they lose completely, MDC loses the election, what now? What's next? Because I'm sure they can appreciate that it's been nearly 40 years of people suffering in Zimbabwe. And the last thing is a comment where I think, look, these nationalist movements right across Africa are the same. They just won't go easily. What can we do? I think I really think we have to go into a serious coalition. We might not want some of the coalition partners, but I don't think this is the time for such choices. We really need a coalition. Look at what happened in Gambia. The only way Jammeh could go was through a coalition.
Right.
Let's have a coalition. Thank you.
August, you've made your point. Thank you so much for those questions. Yes, I will remind you. The first caller asks about the government of national unity. What did you benefit from that? What did Zimbabweans benefit from that?
Well, I think
also, the 2002 election that you say was stolen from you. Why is it taking so long for you to get it investigated? And you know, going forward, what will you do about that? Another caller says safeguarding our vote. If you do admit that indeed your election was stolen, if we vote for you again, what security do we have that our vote will translate into something solid?
Let me start with the last one, because I think it's very, very important.
Right.
We are saying that part of the alliance building and part of the post-Mugabe coalition is about transfer of power. That's a critical thing. If we can't secure transfer of power just because some people don't believe that there is need for democratic will of the people, then we have a problem. And that, I think, we've worked on that. We've worked on the weaknesses of 2008, and I can assure you that come 2018, those same conditions will not apply. Now, let me go to the second one, which is the question of coalitions. I have answered that before.
Yes.
I think it's imperative. As I said, the big tent is the approach. The question of making sure that if you look at all these opposition parties or parties, their policies are not different. So what is the difference? The difference is our personalities and some of these things. But I'm sure that we'll be able to work at dealing with personalities rather than the policies that are supposed to be pursued. The first question...
there was a question about the 2002 elections. I'm not sure if you have
Well, that one
that.
is that it's the judiciary. The judiciary is dominated and is controlled by the executive. And we went to a situation in which 2013, I even went and said, we want the voting materials. And the courts could not give us the voting materials. What does it mean? It means that the judiciary is under control of the executive. Right. As long as ZEC is controlling the elections and the ZEC is also being controlled by the executive, it's a vicious circle. And I think that these are the lessons that we learn from every African election.
And speaking of elections, we have some tweets that are coming through. You can go ahead. Our Twitter handle is at ANN7TV. At Bango Sitola says, please ask Mr. Tsvangirai what the plan is should the election be rigged as widely believed.
Well, I think we should not resign ourselves to fate. I think it's incumbent upon the leadership of the opposition, the leadership of Zimbabwe, to make sure that we give Zimbabweans the right to choose. And we continue to fight. In fact, when the MDC project was formed post-liberation, the first post-liberation formation, the idea was that we go back to the ideals of the liberation struggle. You fought for one man, one vote. You fought for the freedom of the country. And therefore, you cannot move away from that. If there is a deviation that has taken place, surely, ideologically, people should call these nationalists to order. And to me, that is the biggest challenge that ZANU-PF has. It cannot answer why it is deviating from the very ideals that motivated them to go and fight for liberation.
All right. Tererai from Northwest, thank you for calling us. Your question, please.
Okay, I just want to pass my comment. I hear a lot of people, they are asking why Tsvangirai don't give power to the other ones in the MDC. Our problem in Zimbabwe is not Tsvangirai, it's Mugabe. So we must focus on removing Mugabe before we think of taking Tsvangirai down. And it's like a football game. if the team is not performing, we don't have to substitute from the bench. We have to substitute those who are playing. It's Mugabe who is playing now. So we have to change Mugabe before we think of changing Tsvangirai.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comment there. Well, that wasn't a question, just a comment from Tsvangirai, who seems to agree with you that the problem is not about the change of power from the opposition, but the concentrating on making sure that people go and vote and their voices are heard. The issue of electoral reform, the number of Zimbabweans that are here in Zimbabwe, I think we spoke about this in our last interview. Yeah. What hope is there for them?
Well, first and foremost,
what needs to happen?
I'm sure that the Constitution allows for diaspora to vote. The question is not about their right to vote. The question is, are we going to build, is ZEC going to build the administrative mechanism to ensure that people vote? And let me tell you one thing. There are 3.5 million voters in the diaspora. Do you think that ZANU-PF would like those people to come and vote?
When you were part of the government of national unity, is that not something that you looked at?
That's why we had the Constitution, which allowed for everyone to vote, dual citizenship, everyone allowed to vote, and those protections are there. The only problem is the practical implementation of that.
The funds that are needed to
and ZEC will, how much was allocated the next election? 9 million. And what do you do with 9 million? They will just make an excuse. We are not given the necessary resources. But it's an excuse which justifies a certain end. That they are not able to carry out their work, even with the assistance of the UNDP. They are not able to carry out their work because of limited resources. Right. And I think that's the root cause of the problem. The rights are there. And what we need is an administrative mechanism that will allow ZEC to come and put a mechanism here in South Africa with the cooperation of the South African government. I'm sure that the South African government will be very willing to cooperate, because the sooner they take away this problem, the better. So I'm quite certain that we'll continue to push for that.
Okay, as we wrap up, Mr. Tsvangirai, are we going to be seeing you in the streets again in 2017 like we did in 2016?
Well, circumstances dictate behavior. In 2016, we set the agenda for public expression, and I'm sure that one of the focuses of our 2017 is the question of electoral reforms and electoral reforms and electoral reforms. Yes. It's going to be one of our rallying cry, because we believe that if we go and have an election under the same conditions, the outcome will not change.